Audiences didn't accept everything. Sometimes this bad CG would make something go viral, and people might hate watch it just to see how bad it really is. Also, what changed is the lighting. These older productions would make their CG look like if they were to really shoot it. We'd have highlights and we'd have shadows, but then we would have these dark blacks. But now they expose things much more like video games, to where you don't have the same kind of lighting that we did before. The things look more flat and fake. And a big part of that is the planning, like I said, and the collaboration. Because the cinematographer and the lighting team would work with the VFX crew, they knew exactly what the lighting should be. So they were able to do this very cinematic lighting that matched the rest of the film. And they didn't just always do CGI backgrounds. Sometimes you would have real backgrounds and just the character was CG. But on a lot of productions, this slowly got erased. It became cheaper and more efficient for them to just put them in a giant green screen room. And they didn't plan what the backgrounds were going to be, they would figure it out later. And you stopped having this same collaborative back and forth between the production team and the post-production team. Because when you're filming green screen work, you have to light the green screen as evenly and as much as possible. And because they're standing in this bright green room, it limits what kind of lighting they can do. Because there's already so much light, sometimes they're just outside filming these things. So they started doing more generic lighting. And they stopped doing as stylized of lighting because they didn't know what it was going to look like in the end, and that way the VFX team had more room to adjust and shift things and kind of figure it out as they go. But then you see we don't have the same lights and shadows, and it became much harder for them to do this cinematic lighting. And so things end up looking flatter and not as striking. And over time, they started rushing the VFX team, not giving them as much time for post-production, and we see what effect that ends up having on the final product. With these big movies, they used to say what year they would come out, or maybe the season and the year. And this would give the post-production crew the time they needed to really refine everything. Because they weren't held to an exact date, they knew they had to get it out that year, and they could fluctuate the release based on how much time they needed. Because when you delay your movie from its release date, it signals to audiences that the movie might not be good. So they wanted to avoid that. But over time, they stopped doing that. Soon the marketing team started deciding when the film was going to come out, and they would set an exact date. And so if your CG wasn't ready, if it needed to be finalized, if it needed to be polished up, well, there just wasn't time for that. Because they had to hit that release date no matter what. And so we saw in a lot of movies that it clearly wasn't finished. And that sometimes now the theatrical release will look different than the streaming release because they needed more time on the effect and they didn't get it. So for the initial